At the end of this online module, you should be able to import numeric data stored in external files and store the data in variables for future use. We will begin this module with a problem. You are a Subaru of Indiana engineer working in MATLAB to analyze data related to the number of vehicles produced annually and the volatile organic compounds, or VOC, emissions in vehicles produced. There are two files that must be imported into MATLAB from external files in order to analyze these data. The files are voc_emissions.txt and annual_production.csv. Through this module, we will learn to import these types of files into MATLAB. MATLAB can import many types of data files using a variety of built-in functions. In this course, we will focus on the MATLAB command readmatrix to load numeric data into MATLAB. The format for the command is readmatrix with the file name as the input. The file name should include quotes and the extension. For this course, we will mainly use CSV, which stands for comma separated value, Excel, or text files. Take a look at this example data file called sample.xlsx, which is an Excel file. Notice it has a description line in row 1 and labels for each row and each column of the data. In MATLAB, when readmatrix open parentheses, quote, sample.xlsx, end quote, close parentheses, is used, the resulting matrix is shown here. The command readmatrix detects the first row in which the numerical data exist and then makes an M by N matrix with the cells below, stopping when the entire columns or rows are blank. Notice that it ignores rows 1 and 2, which contain only text, and begins at the first row that has numerical data, in this case, row 3. The readmatrix command will fill in any missing data or text data within the array with an NaN, which means not a number. Column A is all texts, so we see this line of NaNs. In cell D6, there is text rather than a number, and the matrix in MATLAB replaces that with NaN. Cells B7 and D7 are empty and still within the rectangle of data that readmatrix will make. So these are each also replaced with NaN. Therefore, when using readmatrix to load data, it is important that you understand your data file before you begin. Before you can load any data file into MATLAB, you need to set MATLAB's current folder to the location where the data file is saved. Here you see MATLAB's default layout. You can play with different layouts by clicking here. In this view, notice that you can see the contents of the current folder here. If the data you want to load are not in this window, you will need to change the folder or add the files to this folder. Here, you can see the breadcrumbs for the folder that is set to the current folder in this bar at the top of the window. If the current folder is not set to the correct location, one way to change it is to click the button directly to the left of the current folder, and from this window, browse for the correct folder. So let's go back to our problem. First, I need to load the data file called voc_emissions. This file is a text file or txt file. Many data files contain text along with numeric values. The voc_emissions file does that as well. This txt data file contains the amount of volatile organic compounds produced per vehicle at Subaru of Indiana from 1999 through 2012. It contains both information about the data and column headers, along with numeric data. The readmatrix command will ignore any rows that have no numerical data in them and start on the first line with numerical information. In this case, that begins on the line that starts with the year 1999. Let's import these data. I will import this using readmatrix open parentheses, double quotes, voc_emissions.txt, end quotes, end parentheses, and hit enter. Oh, I get an error telling me that MATLAB cannot find this file. Oh, this is because I'm in the wrong folder. I will use the file icon to browse for the correct folder. Okay, so now I'm in the correct folder and I can see my file here. I will run my read matrix command again. Whoa, what does this output mean? Oh, this is just MATLAB giving me my answer in scientific notation. Notice that the 1 times 10 to the 3 times each value gives me back the years that I expected to see in the first column. Notice that the variable the data exists in is called ANS. That won't be useful if it gets overwritten by another MATLAB command. So let's instead load the data right into a variable name that we want to use. I will assign the variable name Subaru_VOC as we load the data. We now see the output on the screen and the variable we created in the workspace. From our problem, we have one more file to load. This time, we will load the annual production file, which is a .csv file. In this file, there are 3 columns of information and some headers. As with Excel and text files, readmatrix will ignore the first 5 rows of the file since they do not contain numerical data, again starting with a line that begins 1999. In this example, we will import into MATLAB the Subaru annual production data from the file annual_production.csv. To import these data directly into MATLAB, I'll type the command Subaru_prod equals readmatrix of annual production.csv. This will load the data right into the variable Subaru_prod. When I do this, I get a matrix with the middle row of NaN. Remember, that means not a number. There are a couple of ways we can deal with this. If we want a matrix of all numbers, we can just create a new matrix that eliminates the middle column using array indexing. Let's try that first. So I will create a new matrix called prod_data and call the matrix Subaru_prod with all of the rows using a colon and just the first and third column by making a 1, 3 vector here. See? This gives me just the first and third columns in this new matrix. Another way to deal with this is to go ahead and parse the columns I want into separate variables. Here, I only need the year and the number of vehicles produced. So let's pull the years from the original data matrix into a variable called year_prod and set that equal to Subaru_prod of all of the rows using a colon in the first column. Now we just pulled out the year information. We can similarly pull out the number of vehicles using num_prod equals Subaru_prod of : 3. And here we see all of the numbers of vehicles produced in each year. Also notice in the workspace, we can see that we have variables that contain each of these options for future use in MATLAB. In summary, we learned that MATLAB won't import data files unless the files are stored in the current folder. The command we use to import data is readmatrix, which requires the file name with the extension within matching quotes. Readmatrix will ignore rows that do not contain numeric data. For rows that do contain numeric data, readmatrix will replace any non-numeric cells with NaN, which means not a number. When loading data, import the data directly into a variable name so that it is usable in future MATLAB commands. Finally, manage the non-numerical cells, the NaNs, by removing the NaNs or extracting the data you need using array indexing.